Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Dear students, welcome back to our sessions for the subject Business Ethics. Today's topic is about marketplace, ethics in the marketplace. We have different objectives for today's sessions, which is one of the main important topics we need to discuss in this subject. So our topics here will be about the concepts of perfect competition. So the second outcome that students should be capable to handle is about the main principle and perfect competition. And then we will discuss the competition in the market, different competition, different market in terms of monopoly, oligopoly, and we will evaluate the ethical principle and the oligopolistic kind of markets. Finally, we will discuss the different view about the oligopolies and public policies. So we have different points to cover here. So the first one is about the perfect competition, and the second topic is about the ethical principles and perfect competition. And then we will talk about different types of monopoly, starting with the perfect kind of monopoly referred to as monopoly competition. And then we will talk about oligopoly monopoly. This is actually part of the monopoly where few firms actually control the whole market, referred to as oligopoly competition. And finally, we will end up with the ethical principles and oligopoly. Now, we know that the competition in today's market is actually influenced by different factors. So that is why when we study the utilitarianism, justice and rights as the main ethical principle, we're trying to gain more attention in regards to the formation of these markets. Today's business is actually affected by different factors affiliating with technology, economy, countries, alliances, strategic alliances among companies, etc. That is why the importance of tackling these principles are of great importance. However, different economic systems and markets impose different results as to how these principles are applied in reality. We said that the problem with this issue is that we're dealing with things that are usually legally achieved but may not be ethically or probably done ethically. So that is the point. If you're talking about different markets around the world, like for example the Chinese market and the European markets, the way things are handled in terms of commodity manufacturing, or let us say the way they have in terms of procedures, manufacturing, patent, copyrights, these things are actually different from one place to another. Considering the economic system of different countries, we may find also different application of these principles in different countries. Now we start with the first one, the perfect competition. In perfect competition, the free competitive market as we referred to, no buyer or seller has the power to significantly affect the price of the good. So we have here 7 main features that characterize such markets. Now, without these features, we may find that these markets are not entirely perfect. So, every buyer and seller has full and perfect knowledge of what every other buyer and seller is doing, including knowledge of the prices, quantities, and qualities of all goods being bought and sold. So here, in a perfectly free competitive market, we said these characteristics affecting the market is actually based on the following points. Number 1, there are numerous buyers and sellers. None of them actually can affect the whole market, or none of them has substantial share in the market. So this is the first feature that characterizes such market, referred to as perfectly free competitive market. The second point, every buyer and seller has full and perfect knowledge regarding prices of others, qualities, etc. Third, all buyers and sellers can freely enter or leave the market. Now, what does that mean? It means that whenever there is a job or an opportunity for companies to enter the market, they won't have any kind of obstacles by big companies. So that is why in a perfectly free competitive market, it is kind of easy to enter these markets considering the opportunities. While if you're talking about different markets where things are monopolized, for example, companies cannot easily enter the market because of economic consequences, which can be the result, of course, of such kind of monopoly or oligopolistic markets. Number 4, all buyers and sellers are actually utility maximizers. This is clear because there are so many options in the market. And because of that, if customers do not find the product that they want, they have another option. And accordingly, they try to maximize their benefit to the fullest regarding these alternatives. Number 5, products sold are actually so similar to each other that no one cares from whom each buys or even sells. That is why, as we referred before to the point of utility maximizer, there are so many options in the market. They're trying to offer exactly the same product that is actually needed and wanted by the customer. So there is a competition here, and this competition is more based on the needs and wants. Number 6, the costs and benefits of producing or using the goods are actually borne entirely by those buying or selling the goods. And the last one, talking about perfectly competitive market, there shouldn't be any kind of external parties interfering or regulating the price. For example, the government. So here, no external parties such as the government regulate the price, quantity, or quality of any products, like those in command markets. Now let's talk about ethics and these kind of markets. Free competitive market actually requires an enforceable private property system, and that is actually adopted by Adam Smith and before by John Locke and other theorists. Prices rise when supply falls. This is the mechanism of these markets, which is kind of normal, including inducing greater production. And finally, the amount produced exactly equals the amount buyers want to purchase. So there is an equilibrium in terms of supply and demand, and of course in terms of the prices. So that is why perfectly free markets satisfy 3 of the moral criteria, that is, justice, utility, and rights. So here, first, in a perfectly competitive market, buyers and sellers are actually free by the definition of such kind of markets to enter or leave the market as they choose. So in that regard, we have here a choice, different alternatives offered to companies, to customers as individuals. So there is actually maintaining the rights of individuals to choose freely. And that is why they say here it goes with the first ethical principle referring to right. Second, in the perfectly competitive free market, all exchanges are fully voluntary. That is, participants are not forced to buy or sell. Back again to freedom to choose. So they're not actually forced to buy or sell anything other than what they freely and knowingly consent to buy or sell. Third, no single seller or buyer will so dominate the market that he is able to force the others to accept his terms or go without. Now, this is something that we can find actually in monopolized markets. For example, when talking about Microsoft Corporation, for example, the number of alternatives you or other companies may have are actually very, very limited. So here, you're actually forced to buy these products because of such kind of domination on the market. no other available and amenable alternatives in the markets. While in perfectly free competitive market, this option is actually granted. So here, perfectly free or perfectly competitive free markets embody the negative right. The negative right of freedom from coercion. As we said before, your right to choose without being interfered by the others. And thus, they are perfectly moral in the three important aspects or respects that we discussed before. Each continuously establishes a capitalist form of justice. Together, they maximize utility in the form of market efficiency, and this is affiliated with the first principle, utilitarianism. And each respects certain important negative rights of buyers and sellers. Now, considering these kind of markets that are maintaining the three principles of ethics, we also have other options. We're not considering them as options, but these are different markets we can find in today's business and markets. So, because of that, we need to understand the other kind of market natures. So, we have the monopoly competition. In a monopoly, 2 of the 7 conditions that we discussed before are actually absent. First, there's only one seller. Unlike the perfectly free competitive market where we have different sellers and buyers, here we have only one seller. As we said before, pharmaceutical industries that somehow dominate the industry, considering 1 or 2 products, Microsoft company, etc. Other sellers cannot enter the market. Now, when we say that they cannot enter the market, we're not talking about not being able to enter the market legally. Here, it's all about economic consequences. If a company that somehow dominate the whole markets, so when other company would like to get in these markets, they will have to bear huge costs in order to reach the break-even point where they can collect money and profitability. So this company that dominates the market will reduce the prices, and that this new company will have to do the same. But actually they can't, because they need to reach the break-even point at a given time. So the present and future monetary value of this company will not be helpful in this case. So that is why we say they cannot enter the market, because of the economic consequences and the time it takes them to break even. Monopoly market results in a decline in efficiency of the system, and this is against utilitarianism. Companies that dominate the whole market will not actually think of resources, as long as the prices that they set will be very high. And accordingly, they will not think about recycling, which is actually against efficiency. Here, seller charges more than the goods are worth, and that is why we find sometimes the compact disk or the CD of Microsoft maybe is more than $150. Well, actually, the production cost of such kind of product may not be more than $2 or $3. But actually here, the monopolized or the nature of this monopolized market allowed the company to set very high prices, simply because no other alternatives here. So here the prices the buyer must pay are actually unjust. So by this we find that monopolistic markets actually go directly against the 3 principles of ethics. In terms of efficiency matter, which is against utilitarianism, and the unjust price set by these companies, this goes against justice, and that no freedom in terms of choosing. You don't have the capability to choose among different products, which is here it goes against rights of individuals to choose freely without being affected by such kind of monopoly or domination. So here, first, monopoly causing shortages of resources, which leads to unnecessary high prices, which is why we talked about efficiency. Second, a monopoly firm is not encouraged to reduce its cost because they set very high prices which cover all these costs. And monopoly market allows the seller to introduce price differentials that blocks customers to satisfy their needs. What does that mean? A customer that needs to buy the 150 or a CD for $150 will not be able to use this amount of money to buy other needs and wants. But in a perfectly free competitive market, this product can be $50, so he or she may still have $100. Now this $100 will be used for satisfying other needs. So that is why this kind of market, with the nature of these markets, actually goes against individuals. Now we have another types of these markets, which is referred to as oligopoly competition. So here it is a small club and your internet, which means that a small club of 4, 5, 7 or 8 businesses that dominate the whole market. Other companies cannot actually enter this market because of these companies dominating this market. So most industries are not entirely monopolistic, and this is very hard. If we think about companies that dominate the whole market, or in a monopolistic market, we may come up only with 3 or 4 names. But talking about oligopolistic markets, there are many. So most are dominated by a few large firms, which is still kind of control. So these markets lie somewhere in between the monopoly and perfectly competitive free market. So here, instead of having so many options to the customer and perfectly competitive free market, or having only one company dominating, we have oligopoly in the middle. But still, oligopolistic markets make it quite hard for other companies to join, as you will see here. The most important type of this perfectly competitive market is called oligopoly. So here, in an oligopoly, 2 of the 7 conditions are not present. Now, we're talking about the main or the 7 conditions as we discussed at the beginning of the session. So the first one, there are only few significant sellers instead of big number of sellers and buyers. Second, sellers are not free to enter the market. Unlike the perfectly competitive free market, any company, any individual business, for example, as sole traders or partnership, can freely join the market once there is an opportunity. So here, market like this, which are dominated by 4 to 8 firms, are highly concentrated markets. And actually this depends on the industry itself. So it can be even up to 8 or 10 companies dominating the market. So in these markets where we have up to 4 or 5 or 6, for example, so these kind of markets are actually referred to as very or highly concentrated markets. Therefore, like monopolies, oligopolistic markets fail to set just profit because of the high prices they will set, do not respect basic economic freedom, which is against individual and companies' rights, and do not consider to protect social utility. So by this, such kind of, or the nature of these markets actually go against these principles, justice, right, and utilitarianism. So here, the following list identifies practices that are clearly unethical. Now, these kind of practices are actually found in oligopolistic markets more than other kind of markets. For example, prices can be fixed according to the agreement among those big players in the market. So if you have 6 companies dominating the whole market, they may come to an agreement to fix the price, so that the price will always be high. So when companies agree to set prices artificially high. Manipulation of supply is another of these practices. When a company agrees to limit production so that the supply in the market is not actually based on the demand, and accordingly the prices will be even higher. Exclusive dealing arrangement is another practice. When a company sells to a retailer only on condition that the retailer will not purchase products from other companies. Otherwise, he will not find these products. Tying arrangements. As the name suggests, when a company sells a buyer certain goods only on condition that the buyer also purchases other goods from that firm, and this firm is actually one of those companies that dominate the markets. Retail price maintenance agreement. Now, considering retailer, when a company sells to a retailer only on condition that they agree to charge the same set retail price or prices. Finally, price discrimination. When a company charges different prices to different buyers for the same goods or services. Now, this can only be found in these kind of markets, which are referred to as oligopolistic markets. Now, talking about the public policy and this nature of markets. Remember, we're talking about markets that dominate somehow almost all markets around the world. So, what should public do as against these kind of markets? So we have 3 different point of views. So we would like to discuss here. What should society do in the face of high degree of market concentration in oligopolistic industries? There are 3 main points here. The first one is called do nothing view. Now, as you find here, as the name suggests, it is recommended that we do nothing as against these markets, and they have these justifications. The do nothing view claims that the power of oligopolies is not as large as it appears. Besides, there are countervailing powers as against these companies. For example, these countervailing power of other large corporate groups, the government, the unions that keep corporations in check, especially in Western countries and Europe. Finally, they argue that the bigger is better, especially in the current age of global competition. So we have something called economies of scale. Economies of scale referring to big scale of economies of these companies, which can somehow help protect the market when facing economic or financial crisis. So here, economies of scale produced by high concentration actually lower prices for consumers. On the other hand, we have the antitrust views. So this view actually stands for the following. Prices and profit in highly concentrated industries are actually higher than they should, which is of course right. By breaking up large corporations into smaller units, they say, high levels of competition will emerge in these industries, resulting in better economic status. Finally, the result will be a decrease in collusion, greater innovation, and lower prices. So the more alternatives, the more competition in the market, the better the ideas that come up to reality, to the service, the more options we have in mind. For example, the customer may have different alternatives, so the customers and even sellers will be utility maximizers as those and perfectly competitive free markets. Now the last or the third view is referred to as regulation view. The third view is the regulation view here, which can be seen as a middle ground between the other two theories or the other two views. Here, regulation do not wish to lose the economies of scale offered by large corporations, especially if you're talking about economic recessions or financial crisis. Suggesting here, such kind of views suggest setting up regulatory agencies and legislation to control the activities of large corporations. So, doing so here will help maintain such kind of privileges referred to as economies of scale, and at the same time they control such kind of activities not to go loose. It also suggests that government should take over firms that operate in the public interest. By this, dear students, we come to the end of our sessions. We discussed and explained the concept of perfect competition. We also evaluated the ethical principles and the perfect competition. We also talked about monopoly as a monopoly competition, and then we discussed oligopoly. We evaluated different policies and different principles referred to oligopoly. And finally, we discussed a different view about oligopolies and the public policies point of view. So by this, you have an attachment at the end of this session in which you have to answer the questions affiliating with facts and opinions we discussed in today's topic. Thank you very much for attending and listening, and see you inshallah next week. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.